It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night. The streets were quiet. The city lights flickered against the pavement. And a 16-year-old boy named Jalen Carter was walking home, headphones in, backpack slung over his shoulder, his mind on nothing more than the math test he had studied for. But life has a cruel way of turning the simplest moments into the ones you'll never forget. Because that night, Jalen's path crossed with a kind of man who wore a uniform, but carried something far darker beneath it. Officer Bradley, a cop with a badge polished to perfection, and an ego twice as shiny. The kind of man who didn't see kids like Jalen as students, or dreamers, or sons. He saw them as suspects, as targets, as someone to control, to humiliate, to break. The flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. Jalen froze. The officer stepped out, slow, deliberate, every movement dripping with power. "Where you headed, boy?" Bradley asked, his voice sharp like broken glass. Jalen swallowed. "Home, sir." But Bradley smirked. "Home? At this hour? With a backpack that heavy? What's in it? Stolen goods? Drugs?" The words cut deep. Jalen tried to answer, tried to explain it was just books, just his notes, just the weight of a kid trying to succeed. But Bradley didn't care. He shoved Jalen against the car, hands searching, grip tight, pressing his face to cold metal. The neighborhood watched from their windows, silent, afraid. Because they knew, arguing with a man like Bradley could cost more than just dignity. It could cost everything. And Jalen, he wasn't just humiliated. He was broken. "Kids like you," Bradley sneered, "don't go to college. You don't become doctors or engineers. You end up in cuffs, or worse." The words burned. They weren't just lies. They were curses, meant to strip Jalen of every dream, every ounce of pride. Finally, Bradley released him. No charges. No arrest. Just a scar carved into Jalen's spirit. He walked home that night, slower than before. The backpack heavy, but not because of the books inside. Because of the shame he carried now. But what Officer Bradley didn't know was that the boy he humiliated had someone waiting at home. Someone who wasn't just a father, but a man who understood both justice and power. Judge Marcus Carter. Tall, commanding. A man who carried himself with calm authority, but whose very presence could silence a room. He had spent years behind the bench, weighing truth and lies, handing down verdicts that shaped lives. And he had one rule above all: never let injustice stand. When Jalen walked in that night, his father knew instantly. He didn't need words. The slumped shoulders, the red eyes, the silence. They told him everything. "What happened?" Marcus asked softly. And when Jalen finally broke down and told him, something shifted in Marcus. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a judge. And this case was personal. The next morning, Marcus made a call. A quiet call. One that set things in motion. Because fate has a way of arranging the pieces. And soon, Officer Bradley would walk into a courtroom, thinking he was untouchable. But this time, he wasn't holding the power. He was standing before it. Days later, the courtroom was full. Bradley had been accused, finally, after too many complaints, too many misunderstandings. The community sat in silence, waiting. And then, the judge walked in. Marcus Carter. The gavel struck. All rise. And when Bradley looked up and saw who was presiding, his smug confidence cracked. Because the man behind the bench was the father of the boy he tried to break. The irony was sharp. The humiliation had come full circle. And justice, real justice, was ready to be served. The trial began. Witnesses spoke. Neighbors told their truths. And Jalen, trembling but brave, stepped forward. He told the story, every word clear, every detail unshaken. And though Bradley tried to dismiss it, tried to twist the narrative, the truth was undeniable. Because this time, the power wasn't in his hands. It was in the hands of a father, a judge, a man who had vowed to protect both justice and his son. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Bradley. his voice calm, but heavy with meaning. "You thought you could humiliate my son. You thought you could strip him of his dignity, his future, with words, with force, with lies. But let me remind you, power without justice is nothing. And tonight, you will answer for it." The courtroom was silent, the weight of the moment pressing on every soul inside. Bradley shifted in his chair. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. And when the verdict came down, the balance of power shifted forever. "Guilty." The word rang out like a thunderclap. Bradley's face drained of color. The man who once wore a badge as armor was now stripped of it. And Jalen, for the first time in days, he stood tall. Not because his father was a judge, but because his truth had finally been heard. His voice had finally mattered. The community erupted in whispers. Some smiled. Some cried. Because this wasn't just about Jalen. It was about every kid who had ever been told they weren't enough. Every voice silenced. Every dream dismissed. That day, something bigger than a verdict happened. Hope returned. But just as it seemed justice had prevailed, a shadow lingered. Because Officer Bradley wasn't alone. He had allies. Friends in high places who weren't ready to let him fall. And while the courtroom had silenced him for now, the fight was far from over. That night, Marcus received a message. A single envelope slipped under his door. No name, no address, just a single sentence written in bold ink. The gavel had struck. The verdict had been spoken. But the battle was only beginning. And what came next would test not just Jalen's courage, not just Marcus's strength, but their family's survival itself. Because when justice threatens power, power always fights back. And this fight was far from over. The note sat on the kitchen table. Its words burned like fire. Jalen stared at it, his chest tight. His mother's hands shook as she read it over again. But Marcus, Judge Carter, sat still. His face calm, his voice steady. But inside, he knew exactly what it meant. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because Officer Bradley wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly. He had friends, powerful friends. And if the courtroom couldn't save him, they'd try something else. That night, Marcus gathered his family. His wife, his son. He looked them in the eyes. "Listen to me. No matter what happens, we don't let fear control us. We stand strong. Together." But standing strong wouldn't stop what came next. The very next morning, Marcus walked into his courtroom. But something was different. The bailiff's eyes avoided his. The clerks whispered behind their papers. And waiting inside was a new lawyer. One flown in from out of state. Paid for by a network of men who had everything to lose. If Bradley's conviction stood, the lawyer stood tall, confident, smiling like a man who already knew the ending. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "we're filing for an appeal. Based on misconduct." Misconduct? Marcus froze. The lawyer continued. The presiding judge had a personal conflict of interest. The defendant was tried by the father of the alleged victim. This entire case, he paused, smirking, is invalid. The courtroom erupted. Bradley leaned back in his chair, smirk wide, eyes locked on Marcus. This wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about power. And Marcus realized he was walking into a trap. Because everything he had done, everything he had fought for, was now being twisted against him. The headlines spread fast. Judge Carter under fire for conflict of interest. Conviction in question. Officer Bradley fights back. And suddenly, Marcus wasn't just a judge. He was the accused. But that wasn't the worst part. That night, Jalen noticed something strange. A car, parked outside their house. Engine off. Windows tinted. Sitting there. Watching. Every night, it returned. Same car. Same spot. And the message was clear. "We're watching you. Jalen's hands trembled as he told his father. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry. They want us scared. They want us silent. We won't give them that." But even as he said the words, his eyes betrayed him, because he knew this fight had left the courtroom, and now it was on the streets. Then came the breaking point. One evening, Marcus returned home late. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He called out, "Jalen, Maria." No answer. His heart pounded. He rushed through the house. Empty. The note on the kitchen table. The car outside still parked. And then his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered. A voice he recognized instantly. "Bradley." Cold. Calm. Cruel. "You thought the courtroom was where this ends? No, Judge Carter. This ends when I say it does. And right now, your family is with me." Marcus froze. Every breath shallow. Every second heavy. Bradley wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was war. But before Marcus could speak, the line went dead. And when he looked outside, the car was gone. The judge stood alone in his home. The silence crushing. The weight unbearable. And he realized this wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about survival. The fight had moved beyond the courtroom. And now, it was Marcus Carter against a system, a man, and a power far greater than he'd ever faced. But the question wasn't whether he would fight. The question was, just how far would he go? To get his family back? Please subscribe for part 2.